Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Eddington. This is the latest film from Ari Aster. I've seen his first two. I didn't see. I was afraid. I don't have a good read. I just never got around to it. But this film is an interesting one in that it's sort of controversial, sort of getting mixed reception. I felt very mixed on it, actually. But I have mixed feelings, but I think part of it is. This is a film about a town in New Mexico called Eddington, basically taking place during COVID, which was only about 5 years ago. I think when you're making a film this close to something, it is usually like you sort of missed your window for when like it's cool to just have talked about it, and 5 years is a weird nostalgia time. I saw The Big Lebowski when it came out in theaters, and when I saw it originally, it was like this weird riff the Coen Brothers did, and like nobody I knew was that into it, like nobody cared. And then years later, it's like everyone loves it, and it's this cult thing, and I don't know how that happened, honestly, because at the time I was like, I guess I just saw this Coen Brothers. It was a weird Coen Brothers movie. What's wrong about that, you know? But I do think this film will age. How this film will age will be interesting. But I do think if you see this like 10 years after I shoot this review or something, you might like this movie a lot more, which I notice sometimes happens. This is a very Robert Altman, and Nashville influenced film, mishmashed with John Ford, who influenced almost everybody, and probably influenced Robert Altman as well, to kind of talk about the crazy time that was COVID. You basically have two men, one played by Pedro Pascal, the other played by Joaquin Phoenix, and Joaquin Phoenix has been, or sorry, Pedro Pascal has been the mayor and is going to run for re-election, and Joaquin Phoenix, who is the sheriff, is going to run against him and is like super conservative and anti-mask and all the things like that. I don't know about this because I do like it. I like certain things about it. I like how it actually used the Robert Altman thing. I heard so much about Robert Altman for a long time and liked him a lot, and then it seemed like I never heard about him brought up anymore. And I thought, oh, I guess that's over. That stinks. He was so good. And it seems like we're hearing more about him, and I think this film will show that. Particularly Deidre O'Connell, the character of Deidre O'Connell, who one of Robert Altman's big things was overlapping dialogue, and I think her whole character for most of the movie is like this Greek chorus mother-in-law in the background, and she very much is almost all overlapping dialogue. She might be the most Altman character because of that. And I like those elements to it, and I like that a director made a film like this. I think that's actually really cool, a really difficult, weird film about COVID, and COVID is or lockdown, since COVID's still around, basically. But when lockdown happened and all that stuff, and it did feel like this crazy, chaotic time. I've often said, that when my kids are older and they'll like watch a documentary or podcast or whatever it is, by that point, they'll be like, how could you not mention this? I'm like, dude, I was so overwhelmed. I don't know what to tell you. Like sometimes I'll look back on that time and I'll forget a thing, go, oh, right. And it's not even a little thing, but there were so many things going on. But it's showing it in a little town, and I think it's trying to show how all of these, some people are very reactionary and upset and looking for a connection, and because we had this much more time, we were able to go into things that we wouldn't necessarily do. I do think the protest thing, they have a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly white people were very involved in that protesting. In small towns, when people go, well, why would you protest in a small town? I actually did protest with friends. We had a small group in Towson, Maryland, and a lot of those guys have actually gone on to be much more politically active. So my experience with that is more positive than just performative, is how most people, and I'm sure people still think, if they look back on that like 30, 20 some years ago, they probably feel that way. But that's, one of my friends was Ryan Harvey. He worked for Tom Morello and all this stuff. So my experience was different than most people, and I've met other people who's I've seen gone on to other things. But some of that, I do agree, those people were being performative. But I look at it that time as more like your freshman year of college, where you're experimenting and learning all this stuff. And you should do that if you have a lot of free time. I don't think there's a negative thing about that. But obviously, like, I used to be very into like Free Mumia and all that stuff. And now I don't know what happened to that guy. I haven't gotten to look it up. And it's not because I don't give a shit morally. It's just because life happens in that way. I think he looks at it as a more negative thing. And almost like this town, I almost look at it as, because people were bringing up Young Mr. Lincoln, which I have seen. It's not like my favorite Ford. I don't know how many Fords I've seen. John Ford made a lot of movies, and is like, without John Ford, we wouldn't have Star Wars. We wouldn't have Akira Kurosawa. We wouldn't have like so many, like Spielberg would be different, not just because of the Spielberg thing, the Fablemans thing, but like, he's an insanely influential filmmaker. If you don't, you should see, if you're into movies, go see a John Ford. I'm not even joking. It's like, he is probably the most influential filmmaker of all time. I think Orson Welles, someone asked him who are your 3 favorite directors, and he said John Ford, John Ford, John Ford. So like, it's like understanding that the sky is blue kind of thing. One of my favorites that I don't hear as mentioned as much, unfortunately, but there's a lot to pick from, so whatever. But is Fort Apache, and what I like about Fort Apache, you kind of have John Wayne, and you have Henry Fonda, and Henry Fonda represents kind of the old guard of attack and strategy, and John Wayne represents the new guard, and the old guard kind of fails because the new people know how to adapt and so forth. I actually, in thinking about this film, think it is sort of like Fort Apache, but like, it doesn't work out for 2 individuals anymore. It just works out for the rich, basically. It's basically like the powerful will always win in the end. And I think that's the difference between the Old West and, a town like in New Mexico. I've never been there, but like a small town now, is like the overarching rich people will always win. And the 2 individuals who are fighting will never really gain anything. And I think the overall message of the film is, you thought it was about this and that and all these things, but it really was just about the rich always prospering, and we all got distracted possibly. I don't know if I feel that way, and I don't know. I've thought about this film a lot, and I didn't shoot this right away because I was very negative, but then when I listened to a negative review of this film, I'd get upset. Because I was like, I don't feel it was all bad. And I think Joaquin Phoenix gives a great performance. Actually, it's one of his better performances in a while. Pedro Pascal is, I liked him more than Fantastic Four, at the very least. And I think in a lot of stuff I've seen him in, I liked him a lot. And I like the performances. The only one is like, why Emma Stone was in this, I have no clue. That was, this does feel like a very overcast movie in a lot of ways. But almost everyone, like, there was a reason they were there, and like, particularly like Austin Butler, I think, made the most of his screen time, and it made sense. But Emma Stone, I was like, this is just like, I'm sure she wanted to work with Ari Aster, and she wasn't bad, but like, why did you give her nothing to do like this? I don't know if she was like, I'll give you a weekend, bro, or something. But it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I did think Deidre O'Connell gave a really good performance. And particularly, like, by the way, I will point out that, like, if you're doing a performance and you're just in the background for most of the movie and being an important part of the movie, that is a really hard thing to do as an actor, and to get people to, like, follow you and know who you are. So hats off to her, because that is, like communicating to the audience when they're distracted by other things is a really hard thing to do. And I'm like, if anything, I think if, not one of those give this person an Oscar nomination, but it was one of the more interesting performances I've seen this year, for real. And I liked a lot, there's like too many people to go into. And certain people's endings were hilarious. I think you can guess which one I think that about. But I don't know. I think if any movie of this year, I think there's certain films that are of our time, certainly, and the context they're in. And I think the context of this movie hurts it, much like what I talked about with Big Mouse, because we're just like, we're so overwhelmed to deal with the past, like with COVID. I'll refer to it, but I even noticed like a couple of years out, people wanted to talk about it because we didn't get to talk as much. And I feel like right now we're done talking. And yes, we live in a world, we are, because of COVID, like that started the 2020s. Like there's certain moments that start certain decades, much like 9/11 did for the 2000s, or certain artistic things like Smells Like Teen Spirit did for music in the 90s. And I actually don't know what started the 2010s. I can't think of a moment there, but there's certain decades that do that. And this is almost about like, look what this brought, like this isolation in this time, and like how it influenced us. But I do think it's like being a freshman in college, where there are certain books you will read and movies you will see and experiences you'll have that will influence a lot of your life. And it's not just because like, oh, I had more time off. It's because you got to excel into those certain things. And possibly, I think what this film is saying, and using this metaphor I've probably used a few too many times, is that it showed us that like maybe the things we wanted to get into were kind of ugly, and we were boiling over, and the fact that like there's certain parts where Joaquin Phoenix just calls Pedro Pascal like a pedophile based on like, or sexual assault, all this like horrible stuff, and it's not founded very quickly. Spoiler, I guess, but this is like 10 minutes in a very long movie, so don't worry. But I think of that of how like you have adults and young people in all these certain ages, and if you leave, it's like if you leave certain people alone, what will they show you about themselves? And when we all let that out, what did that ultimately do? And it caused all this unrest and all these things, but are we the better for it, I guess? And I think this film tries to actually answer that, but I do think ultimately there's a lot of half-baked ideas. It's a far more interesting movie than a good movie. I wouldn't recommend it to someone who, like, if you want to have a good time at the movies or enjoyable time, I wouldn't recommend this, but this is a film I've thought about a lot and debated with people, and as a conversation piece, I think it's excellent. But as a movie, I do feel like, you know, it verges too much on how people feel about South Park a lot of the time, where it's like trying is stupid and why did you do it, and like that didn't go anywhere. I feel like it did a little more with that, but it almost felt like in sometimes like this film, he's just like saying like, well, didn't everything suck? And I don't know if I need that message right now. I think the context of this really hurt this movie, because you're ultimately just looking at it and going like, okay, man, I don't know if that accomplishes what you think it does. You know, I do think it sort of reminds me of the old John Ford Westerns, but I think what it shows you is in the John Ford Westerns, those men and those characters had control over what they were doing. And these men and these characters are trying to control a time that is uncontrollable, and its results we were always veering towards. And I think like it's almost not saying John Ford is outdated and those ideas are outdated or something. It's saying like we might not be living in the world we fully think it is from our gut feeling when we're able to research anything we can. You know, I don't know. It's weird because I feel like I haven't talked about this movie, but I almost feel like this movie doesn't really even talk about this movie sometimes. It's talking about so many different things, and I don't know if you could cover COVID, but I do think like when you look back at Ari Aster, who's obviously going to be a major director of this era, years later, this will be the one I'm far more interested in looking at. But I do kind of think his horror stuff's a lot better. I think the anxiety works more there. Just showing anxiety for the sake of anxiety is not that interesting. You know, we basically had two A24 directors. One became a big box office horror guy, and one became a weird art person where you're not sure who's giving him the money for stuff. So, you know, kind of what happened to the 70s guys, I guess. But I have faith in Ari Aster as a director. I found this to be an interesting deviation, and interesting that he can get people to see these weird ass movies and get cast like this. Like, I was a little surprised in some places because it's like, I'm surprised all these people would do this. But the more I think about it, I find it kind of fascinating. Like, well, are we trying to say like this was the nexus of everything that has happened since, as because we all aired out our things and like tried to be kind to one another, and you know, people resented it or didn't want to do that, and our own insecurities about our own lives like ended up destroying us all. But I don't know, it probably would have been more fun with a few stabby stabs and, you know, killer person or something like that. But I think it is good he riffed like this. I would like to see Beau is Afraid. I do think he's doing great work with Joaquin Phoenix, and there's so many people in this, like I'm probably not going to give enough shout outs. Like, he did a very good job with the cast. But ultimately, when I come to the end of it, I think like, I don't think you captured the time. I think you captured how you felt about the time. But if I'm seeing an Ari Aster movie, I want to know what he's doing. When you see that big name auteur, director kind of person, part of the marketing is you want to see their perspective. So in a sense, am I mad at Eddington, or am I mixed on it? because it's showing the thing that, it's basically saying it's going to. I guess, but at the same time, that doesn't mean I have to fucking like it. So I do like his influences. I like the idea of this movie. I don't ultimately really like it, but I also, as much as I might amuse it, really would like to see it in 10 years. And especially if we get a wave of COVID films, compare this film to that. And I have a feeling this film will probably rise up in my estimation, but I can't review a film outside of the context that I live in fully. I think this is a symptom of how we view COVID now. All World War II films are not really as much about World War II as how we view war in World War II at the time, and I think that's true here too. But I think it's also something, like, he grew up in New Mexico. I don't get the impression he still lives there. I think this is like how he viewed the town and the people in it, and how he felt they would react to COVID, or at least that's how it felt. I don't know if he fully was there as much and more feels like an outsider, but it is an interesting idea. And I like that there's a director who's going out there making interesting stuff, but I don't know if it fully says something or is a big statement on the times the way Nashville actually was with Robert Altman. I think this doesn't do that, unfortunately. It shows his weird version of COVID, and maybe I should be okay with the fact that Ari Aster made a weird version of something and should expect that, but I don't know if I needed this now, and I don't know if I necessarily love it, but I liked feeling mixed about this, and I'm curious to see it in the future. So if you've seen Eddington and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.